Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel, Tomcat Stitchery. I'm Whitney and I'm here for another Sunday sew along. So today is day one of our, I cannot remember the number of this pattern to save my life, of our B6385 pattern, which is a pattern for by Lisette for Butterick for a winter coat, or for a wool coat, a tailored wool coat. That we'll be working on over the next few weeks. Now, I'm going to be doing some extra things to this pattern. We're going to be removing the Dior Dart. I know a lot of people had questions about this. Now, this pattern actually, it has a nice little pocket that goes into the seam, but it does not feature a welt pocket. So if you're new to making a tailored coat, this is actually a fantastic one to do. We are going to do bound buttonholes, although you could very easily, depending on your fabric, very easily skip that step and just do regular buttonholes if you want. But I am going to be showing you how to do bound buttonholes, but because there's not a welt pocket of any sort on this coat, it does make it a little less scary and a little easier. The pocket goes into the, there's a princess seam that it goes into. There are three different collars on this jacket. There's a rounded Peter Pan collar, there's a pointed collar, and then there's a stand-up collar. And I'm going to be making the stand-up collar. That was my sister's preference. What else? Let's see. We'll be doing bound buttonholes, which the pattern doesn't include, but I'm going to be doing that. I'm going to be adding in some, quite a bit of interfacing pieces that are not included with the pattern. And we'll be talking about that a little bit more. What else? Yeah. Oh, and I'm making this one for my sister. So today we're going to be talking about supplies. I'm going to be showing you the muslin fitting that I did with her over Thanksgiving. And then we'll be going to see the pattern and we'll be making our adjustments for her body on the pattern, as well as we'll be removing that Dior Dart. So the Dior Dart is where you've got the little bitty dart that's in the, it's a princess seam, but there's a little bitty dart that's there. It's just kind of hard depending on the how heavy of coating that you're using, and you're going to see my fabric that I'll be using here in a minute. It's really hard to get a really pretty flat dart there in heavier, especially like melton wools, which is what I'm using. So we're just going to remove it. It's not hard. In fact, it's very similar. If you were doing a full bust adjustment in a princess seam, that's like removing the dart is part of that. So when you're doing a full bust adjustment on a pattern with a princess seam, you add a dart basically into the side panel, so the most curved panel, and then you remove it. Although I guess this one isn't coming out of that panel, it's coming out of the straighter panel, but it's going to be the same idea. Very easy to do, and I'll be showing you how to do that. Let's see, what else? Okay, let's go over our supplies and then we'll go take a look at the pattern. And again, I'll be showing you, we're going to be adding some interfacing in a few places that there is not interfacing. So I'll be going over that on the pattern with you as well. And these are all typical places where I would add interfacing in any kind of a coat pattern. There is a yoke on the back of this pattern, so there's not really a need for a backstay because there is the yoke, so we can just interface the yoke. Yeah, we'll be adding interfacing definitely on the hems of the sleeves and the hem of the coat. I like to add interfacing around all the arm's eye. So even though the facing will be interfaced, I am going to add some interfacing into the body of the jacket. Now, if you were making a blazer or something along those lines, something very tailored, you could also, a lot of times there'll be, or especially something with a lapel, you'd build up some interfacing in there, especially there at the roll line where the lapel falls over. This coat does not have a lapel, so that takes a step out of that. And a lot of times you would put some hair canvas right here into the shoulder seam just to kind of fill that area out. We're not going to be doing that here, but we are going to be adding in, well, there's shoulder pads that are included with this pattern, so we'll be putting those in, but I'll also be adding sleeve heads as well that just give a really nice shape to that sleeve, the sleeve cap there, which is all very easy to do. So yes, we'll be going over the pattern. So let's talk about supplies. So how do I want to do this? Okay, we'll talk about these two things first. All right, so the pattern does call for 1/2 inch shoulder pads. I'm actually going to be using 3/8 inch shoulder pads. Yes, the pattern was drafted for 1/2 inch, otherwise it wouldn't say 1/2 inch shoulder pads. 3/8 of an inch are going to be fine. This is just what I had on hand. And actually that's kind of the biggest I like to go personally. And I think my sister would feel the same way. Both of us are very, pretty squared off through here, through our shoulders. We both have a broad back. She is broader in the shoulders than I am because she's taller. I shouldn't say bigger boned. She'll punch me in the face. She's just taller than I am. She's got longer legs, longer arms. You'll see it in the video, but I'm actually standing closer to the camera, and so you can't see the height discrepancy quite as much. But yeah, she's like 5'6". I'm 5'2". So yeah, she got all the height, all the length. She's very long and lean. Short torso though, so we do have that in common. But I'm using 3/8 of an inch shoulder pads. I love these. I got these from Bias Bespoke. I think that's it's an Etsy shop, and I will link them down below. And also there, it's fantastic. They're in New York. They're just, I can get a lot of really good quality tailoring things. Also, they've got sleeve heads. Now this is probably going to be way too long because it's for men's or women's, so we will be trimming ours. But this gets folded in half, and then this gets sewn to the seam allowance of the sleeve cap there in the arm size, so that this folded piece sticks into the shoulder of the coat and just gives it a really beautiful fall. And these are like strips of like, almost like a, technically I think you're supposed to be using Domette or lamb's wool, but this is probably a polyester variation of that. So we will be folding those, and then we actually are gonna sew a line of stitching to keep those closed, like halfway in between, and then it gets hand stitched into the arm size. So we'll be doing that. But I got these sleeve heads also from Bias Bespoke, and it comes in a package of a lot. I don't know how many are in here. And again, we will be trimming these, but yeah, it's better to be long than too short. Also, we will be needing interfacing. I will be using the Perfect Fuse Medium from Palmer and Pletch. I'm using the ecru / white colorway because I'm using a little bit lighter wool, although I could probably use black on this and it would be fine too. I'm gonna use this one, so there you have it. So I'll be using, I think, I may look at my stash. If I have more of the black, I might use the black instead, because you can use black in a lot more than you can use white, if that makes sense. Like if you need white for something, you need white for something. I'll have a look, see. If I'm about even, I'm gonna use the white. It doesn't matter. I love this weft interfacing, and again, this is the Palmer Pletch Perfect Fuse Medium, and I find it's perfect for coats. What else? Buttons. I've not heard back from my sister on which button she wants to use. It calls for 1-inch button. I think these are actually 7/8, but they'll work. So it's between these vintage buttons, this button, which is it's a heavy metal button. Actually, this is one of the options for the sweater that I'm wearing, but this is heavy and this would work for the coat. Or this button. This one's a little bit bigger. It's about a little over an inch. Not 1 1/4 inches. It's a little over an inch though. And these two are like 7/8 of an inch. So I'm waiting to hear back from her which one she wants, but I will need to know that information before I make my bound buttonholes. But I mean, she should get back to me today. So you need a 1-inch button, and you need 5 of them. And if you're doing Fuse C like I am, that has the tall stand-up collar, you also need a snap, like a nice big sew-in snap that, you know, if you want to wear that all the way up, it will be covered. Actually, because that will be seen from the outside, a covered snap would be gorgeous. I think you have to send those off. Any place that does covered buttons and that kind of thing would do a covered snap as well. That would be really pretty, but I don't have anything like that. So we'll be using a sew-in snap for that. And then fabric. So for the body of my coat, I am using this absolutely gorgeous camel colored melton wool. This is so heavy. That I got at Fashion, where did I get this? Fabric Mart, I think. Like I've been hanging on to this quite a while, and with the idea of making a coat for my sister, and actually she paid for it like a few years ago. But if you can see, there's actually a little bit of a pattern on that melton. It's kind of a crosshatch, just a little bit of texture. It's very pretty. And then on the back, it's just kind of looks like a felted melton would look. Oh, this is so heavy. But it's this beautiful camel color, and then, and it's nice and heavy, so that's why we're doing bound buttonholes, because there's no way I'd be able to get a buttonhole into all of, like a nice looking buttonhole into all that fabric. And then for the lining, also from Fabric Mart, and I bought these at the same time. This is actually tie silk, and not THAI, but TIE silk, used for men's neckties, so it's a silk jacquard. It's pretty narrow, like narrower than even a 44, like a 40 maybe, but I bought quite a bit of it. I love this though because it's a heavy duty silk, but it's still really, I was rubbing it on this sweater just to make sure I could get, you know, if it would, things would slide over it pretty easily, and yeah, we're good. But it's 100% silk jacquard. It's just nice and heavyweight, and it's a fun like little print that's gonna be on the inside of the coat. So that's what I'm gonna be using for my lining. And I think I got it for a really good price. It was when Fabric Mart was having one of those big sales. So there you have it. There are pieces that will be, or the supplies that we'll be using for this coat. Pretty easy. This coat is a little bit easier because number one, because you don't have the revered collar, the lapel with a notched collar, the revere, it makes it a little bit easier. You have less to build out when it comes to both the lapel and the back collar where it's going to be folding over. So this is a nice, I think, beginner tailored coat to do. Again, you don't have the welt pocket, and depending on the fabric you use, you can choose to do the bound buttonholes that we'll be doing, or you can just do regular buttonholes. It's kind of up to you. Or you could even do snaps if you wanted to. You know, you could do the sew-in snaps on the inside so that you wouldn't even see anything on the front if you wanted. You know, just kind of sky's the limit. So you can make that as hard as you want. But yeah, everything else should be pretty easy peasy. All right. Let's go over to the cutting table and we're going to take a look at, actually, I'm going to send you to the fitting that I've done for her, the muslin fitting, so you can see what it looks like in bed sheets and the adjustments we're going to make. And then I'll meet you at the cutting table and we'll make those adjustments to the pattern. And then I'm going to show you the interfacing that we'll be adding and the lines that I draw onto the pattern, and then I just trace those off for the interfacing pieces. And before I let you go, I just wanted to remind you that if you do enjoy these sew-alongs and really enjoy, you'll get a lot out of them, and you'd like to help support the channel, I do have a Ko-fi account, which is ko/fi. There's a link down, always a link down below, which is basically like a virtual tip jar. All the money that goes into that does go right back into the channel as far as like editing, you know, software, editing, lighting, materials for the sew-alongs, all that kind of stuff. But it all does go right back into the channel for all of those things, so that I can continue to provide you with the best as my learning curve allows in terms of sew-alongs and tutorials. So just wanted to throw that out there if you're interested and able. All right, I will see you at the cutting table. And then again next week. Okay, so I've got my sister here in her muslin, and we have decided, this is the size 14 AB cup. Sorry. 14. Pattern sizes are completely different than clothing sizes. With the overlap where center front hits, which is right at about there. I think everything looks good. She is obviously clearly much taller than I am. We've got it pinned up 1.5 inches here at the sleeves. I think that's going to be perfect for her arms, much longer arms than I have. I think the shoulders look good. I've put the shoulder pads in. We like the way those are sitting. We are going to be adding 1 inch to the sleeve, and the way, the way that is a good way to determine that is I just cut into the actual fabric of the muslin and had her move around, and then we measured when that. And we also decided to add in, she was feeling a little tightness through the back when she was moving. I mean, obviously you're not going to be hulking out in the wool coat, but I had her do some natural poses, and we're going to add 2.5 inches. So I just make mark notation on there, and then I can mark here on the pattern as well. I'm not sure where I'm going to add this 2.5 yet, if I'm going to add it to the sides, or I may just do this to the pattern piece and then spread this back piece a little bit. Alternatively, you could also add a center back seam if you didn't want to cut, you know, just add an extra seam if you wanted to, but I'm going to avoid doing that, I think. Although since this is cut on the fold, we may have to, I may have to, we'll kind of play around with that at the cutting table and see what I think might be best for adding that width there. But that's it, that's all we're gonna do. We've done the funnel neckline, obviously, and then for the pockets, there's 2 options. There is a rectangular welt and then a shaped welt. She hasn't told me what she wants yet, but yeah, the darts are hitting at her apex. Another note, when I was sewing the sleeves in, I totally caught a lot of the sleeve, and it looks like crap there. It's a muslin, don't worry about it. Don't feel like you have to undo your sleeve and re-put it in. Number one, when this is sewn up in wool, this is all gonna ease in. There's a ton of ease in these sleeve caps because it's a coat. But right now, I mean, trying to put a bed sheet that much
ease into it with a bed sheet is nearly impossible. So, you know, as long as it's not affecting the fit, you're fine. So yeah, but yeah, everything's hitting her just perfectly. Okay. So those are the changes I'm gonna make, and then yeah, she should have a coat that she loves. This is my sister Reagan too, by the way. So okay.
Okay, so you've seen the muslin on my sister. Now I'm miraculously back home. So basically the only adjustments that we are making to this pattern for her, for actual fitting, is that you can see this is the back of the coat. I'm going to add a total of 2.5 inches here on the back. This pattern piece is actually on the fold. So I'm going to show you how we're going to do that. And then also we're going to add 1 inch of ease to the arm. And I like to do that in just the top piece. I think I mentioned this arm is pretty narrow, especially with it being a coat that you're going to be wearing over layers. I know it's a tailored coat, but I think that the arm was like 14.5, and I have a larger upper arm. I mean, it obviously fluctuates with my weight, but typically it runs anywhere from 12.5 inches to 13.5 inches, my bicep. And I like to have at least 2 inches of ease in my arm for a blouse, let alone a coat. So I'm definitely I would have to add probably at least 2 inches of ease to this coat for it to comfortably fit my arm over garments. So, you know, keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. Make a muslin. So anyway, I'm going to be adding 1 inch to the sleeve and then 2.5 total to the back here, which there's a lining, the back piece, and she didn't need anything in the yoke area. That's up high enough that she didn't need anything there, but she does need it right below the yoke. So we'll be making an adjustment both to the lining piece that goes there as well as the actual outer coat. We are also going to be talking about interfacing, but first let's make the adjustments. Oh, and this pattern, let me get the muslin back, has a Dior Dart, which is a little dart that comes in from the princess seam to the body of the coat. And it's just very pronounced. And, you know, if you've got a thicker wool for your coating, which I'm using a very heavy melton wool, that's just not going to lie flat. And it's just going to be like a beacon pointing right to her apex, which no one wants that. So we're going to actually remove this dart. And I've had a few people with a bit more bust than my sister that have also said the same thing. So we're going to do that as well, but we will do that last, I think. Okay, so let's add we're going to add the width to our upper sleeve first. So here is our upper sleeve, and this is the piece for the fashion fabric for the coat and for the lining. You just have a different cut line for your lining. And we're going to be widening this one. And you guys have seen me do this quite a few times, but basically what I do, you've got this little crosshair here that's kind of the center point of the sleeve, and that's what I use for making my lines. And we're making the size 14. I'm just going to just stay right there with that. So I'm making a gigantic cross, and I'm just following those lines. And you'll notice, I mean, it's pretty perpendicular to the grain line, which is not, it seems catty corner, which is typical for a two-piece sleeve. So don't let that throw you. See, it's coming on, you know, it's not going to the middle part of the sleeve down here. It's going off to the side a little. Hopefully you can see that. Can you see that? Yes, you can see that. Okay. And then we're going to go across the arm. And then we are going to go in. Our seam allowances are 5/8 of an inch. So we're creating hinge points. These are the juiciest pins. I really need to get new pins for down here. I'm actually, you know, there's a hem of 1.5 inches. I'm just going to go in 5/8 of an inch here, even though technically the hem allowance is way up here.
It just does less distorting. Okay. So now what we do is you very carefully, I like to fold up this sleeve. You guys have seen me do this is a full bicep adjustment. I do these, again, I've got bigger biceps, and not because I'm buff. Just how my arm is made. So we're going to cut down our line all the way to our hinge point. We're going to stop. We don't want to cut all the way through it. Stop right at that hinge point. And then we're going to cut down to the hinge point. So we're going to cut to our hinge point, but not through it. And I just go all the way around the sleeve piece. It gets pretty flimsy by the time you've cut everything. Okay. So once you've done that, I'll put it sideways here. So you want to lay everything flat. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take our side points here and we're going to pull those out right there at those hinge points, because the sleeve has to be able, there we go, make sure everything, tuck that in, until I have a 1 inch gap. That's probably bigger than a 1 inch gap. It is. It's like a 1 1/4. And it all kind of moves together. There we go. So once we have that, if you, once we have that, we're going to go back and just tape it. If you tape right here first, it keeps everything kind of in place. And there we have it. That is a full bicep adjustment. And you can add, I mean, a decent amount of space at this point. You know, if you needed a lot, you could also add some extra to your seams, especially because it's a 2-piece sleeve. But I don't know, I think you could probably easily add 2 inches to this way without having to even touch the undersleeve. And obviously, when in doubt, do a muslin. So yeah, by the time it gets down here, you have very little distortion. Now, before we leave this sleeve piece and before we move on to the next piece that we need to adjust, and she, again, I mentioned that she's quite a bit taller than I am, so I didn't have to do any shortening of anything for her. But what we're going to do now is we're going to mark in our interfacing lines. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to come down 3 inches on this side. So I'm going to interface basically the sleeve cap, and I'm going to come down 2 on this side. And then we are going to freehand and you want a curved line just because it helps disguise it a little bit. So we're going to do an interfacing piece, and you can just set a piece of tracing paper over this and then trace this line and up around to cut out of your interfacing. So this whole top of your sleeve cap is going to get interfaced. That's going to keep things from stretching out, keep them a lot more stable. And I'll talk a little bit more about it, but once we've cut out this piece in interfacing, I go back with pinking shears and I pink this edge of the interfacing to really make it blend in. So when you have fused this to your fashion fabric, you cannot see any line of the interfacing poking through.
So that we're going to do that there. And then here at the hem, because I want to interface, hold on, let me cut this free of the roll of tracing paper. Also, I always get questions on the tracing paper. I have a link to my Amazon store down below. It's medical exam paper, and I get it from Amazon, and there's a link in my Amazon store if you guys are interested. I do get, my Amazon store is an affiliate, so I do get a commission on that, just to be upfront. But if you don't want to use it, you can at least see what I use. Okay, so I'm going to make, also interface here the hem of my sleeve. And we have a 1.5 inch hem. So I'm going to do a 3 inch piece of interfacing here. And again, I'm just going to put tracing paper over this and trace this section, you know, from this line down, as my, you know, sleeve hem, my upper sleeve hem interfacing piece. So 2 pieces of interfacing for this top sleeve. It's just easy to do this all at once. I'm actually probably just going to cut off some of this excess paper and do that and trace those out. So that is how we're going to adjust this sleeve. And again, those are the interfacing pieces that we want to create for these 2 pieces. And I'll pink the edge of this interfacing piece as well. Basically anything that doesn't go to the edges, you know, if it goes all the way to the edges, like I don't need to pink the edges here, but anything that's going to be in the body of the fabric, you know, any of the hem interfacings and any of the things like this, because we'll be doing something similar to the front of the coat, as well as a little bit to the back of the coat. I just pink those edges. It just gives it a softer line, and then you don't have that hard edge showing through on the fabric. Okay, we'll move on to the next piece. Okay, so next we're going to do the back. I have gone through and made a couple of notations. So I measured down, she really needed the room mostly about 4 inches down from the seam line of where the yoke attaches. So I've drawn a line here, which is 4 inches down, and it's perpendicular to the center fold line. Now, when you're doing a wide back adjustment, you can definitely do a line all the way down. You don't really want to mess with center back. That'll mess with the neckline of a lot of stuff. So, I mean, sometimes that is necessary, but for the most part, yeah, we kind of want to stay away from there. Now, also keep in mind that this back piece is the center back piece, and then there's a side back piece. But I'm only going to be messing with the center back piece because where she needed it was really more like over here. So, kind of over, you know, technically, I guess the shoulder, her shoulder blade would be kind of probably right here over the seam line, but we're going to do all of our addition in this area. Now, she does not have a thick, she's not needing the extra room in the waist and hips, just in the upper back. She just has a broad upper back. The shoulders seem to fit her fine on this though, so we are going to do a little bit of finagling. So I've got this piece here, and then this is the yoke, which obviously gets sewn onto. Now, when I line up my seam lines here, I mean, you will see, I mean, there's a gap, obviously, because there's a side back piece that goes here. We're not going to worry about that side back piece at all. We are not going to touch it at all, because once we do the adjustments here to these 2 pieces, everything will just fit in fine with the side back piece once it gets sewn in. So don't worry about that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I want to pinpoint, and I'm matching my center back lines together, where I want this to add my room. And you really want it to be kind of in, I'm going to put a pattern weight here just to keep everything together. Somewhere up here in the shoulder is basically where I want it to be. And I'm lining up my ruler because I want to keep a straight line here. So I want to probably do it, I mean, like right here will be fine. And I'm just making a line. Whoop. That's moving all the way through. All right, so for right now, I mean, we know that those match up. So I'm just going to set the yoke aside for a minute. Let me make that line a little darker just so you can see it a little better. Okay, so what we're going to, good gracious.
These pins are super juicy when they want to be super juicy and then not when they don't want to be. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I am going to cut. I'm going to cut this a little rectangle here out. All right, I also want to note, so when I had that coat on her, I noted 2.5 inches when she was, pulling her arms forward and whatnot. This is where pattern fitting, this is where art meets science, kind of. Because what we are going to be messing around with, adding 1.25 inches to each side is just going to be too much. I can get away probably with like 3/4 inch on each side without distorting my pattern pieces terribly. So, keep that in mind. So I'm not going to be adding as much as what, when she was pulling across necessarily meant. However, I had only cut open one sleeve, and that can affect what am I hitting? I'm also hitting paper here. A tightness in the sleeve can also cause pulling in the back as well as the fact that she was wearing this in a bed sheet and there's going to be lining in the coat, which will help things slide much easier. She does need the extra room in the back, but she probably doesn't need that much room. So just keep kind of all of those things in mind. So when you're doing something like this, I think you're not going to be able to add in too much. Now, if this piece went all the way up through the shoulder, so if we did not have a yoke piece, you can actually, so if all of this was one piece, I would actually continue this line all the way up, and we would create a whole gap, which would make this back shoulder quite a bit. Actually, you know what? I may just go ahead and do that. I think it's going to keep the pattern pieces from distorting too much. Okay. So what we're going to do, and this would be the same if you were doing this on one piece versus obviously we have a yoke here, but we're going to be making the shoulder wider. Now, the reason we're only going 3/4 inch on each side for that difference is that we're going to be easing in. We're not going to touch the front shoulder. We're going to ease in that 3/4 inch into the front shoulder when we're sewing it together. Number one, we're working with wool, which makes it very easeable. That will ease in really easily into the shoulder. And number two, it mimics a dart. So technically she probably should have some sort of a dart in that area. And, you could put a dart in here and then because there's a yoke, you could manipulate that dart out into this seam here for the yoke. But it's also just, with as much as we're doing, the 3/4 inch, which I think is going to get her just fine. So 1.5 inches total. We don't need to do that. And I think she probably would prefer the smoother lines without the dart, especially because as we're using a thicker fabric, eliminating darts where we can is key there. So that's what I'm going to do. Because it's a thicker fabric and it is wool and it loves to mold and it loves to ease, that's what I'm going to do for this shoulder. So the first thing, and again, since we don't need it all the way down, I'm actually lining this up on my grid. So this line here, and this is where she really needed that extra width, was 4 inches down, which is where I got that line. I'm just going to tape this down. Oh, I had tape pull. There we go. Then it wrapped around the table. All right. So now what I'm going to do is we're just going to scooch this out 3/4 inch. So I'm going to make a line. That makes it easier and you can see it better. 3/4 inch is what we're adding. So this is changing this sewing line, obviously. Hold on, and then we're going to go back. Where's my tape? We'll go back and true this up. So basically what this is doing, it's shifting the armhole, the arm's eye, out. Now, obviously the arm's eye down on this point is on the side back piece, but because this will all be shifting all will be right with the world in the end. Now you could draw in your sewing line and then add the seam allowances back in, but this works just as easily. And also because the side back piece is what am I trying to say? The side back piece is also a princess seam. You'll be able to, any excess, you'll be able to ease back in. So now, this is hard to do around a tripod. Here, I'm going to tape this down so that it's not curling up on me. Okay. So now we're just going to ease it in. This is where you have to just kind of play with your rulers a little. Sometimes you have to come at it from various angles. Let me find that curve first. Basically wanting to take this to nothing by my waistline. Actually, I think that's kind of nice. Okay. And then the top. So obviously, we've now added 3/4 of an inch on each side that needs to get attached to the yoke. So first we're going to cut this piece out. I hate having too much excess paper underneath. It really bothers me. And we're going to keep all of our notches and stuff the same, so I will just move this notch out. So this is giving her the width where she needs it, and it's going to help her be able to raise her arms above her head. I mean, within reason. It is a tailored wool coat, so it's not like, you know, she's not going to be able to do the YMCA all the time. You do have to keep that in consideration too. Like, you're not ballroom dancing in this coat. There's different alterations you do for those kind of jackets and that kind of stuff where your arms have to be up. Okay, just going to tape this down the back a little. All right, and I'm going to set this aside just for a little bit because we're going to be adding some interfacing to all of that as well. So I'm just going to set this aside for a minute. Okay, now we have made our line on our yoke here. Now, because this is all one piece, I mean, which is somewhat nice. I mean, that is nice for cutting out because you have to have 2 of these. We are going to just find scissors. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold this in half and mark so we can get this in the same spot on both the front and the back. is actually on the back, but you can see through the paper, so. All right, because we want our sides to match, obviously. Okie dokie. So now, actually, you know what else I'm going to do? I'm going to extend this grain line here all the way across to give us a point of reference, and we're putting everything back together. All right, I'm just going to anchor this, and I'm putting center back, which is perpendicular to this grain line. This grain line actually runs cross grain, so it's a little different. But I want to keep everything. Okay, so now I can mark 3/4 of an inch. So now this will match up with the bottom part, and oops. So I'm matching up my grain line. That's why I made that reference point, and it has jogged our shoulder seam, which is okay. We'll just true that back up. And when you're truing up jogs like this, the best thing to do is just go from known point to known point. So we're just going to go known point to known point. And there we go. Good gracious, this is not, it's the tape, I think. It doesn't want to go on the tape. Okay, and I'm going to do that on the other side as well. Also, interface. This pattern just calls you for interfacing one side. We're going to interface both. So make sure you do that. We're going to interface both our inside and our outside. Okay, so again, here's our yoke piece now. And yes, our shoulder seams are larger on the back than they will be on the front. We're going to ease all that in. It's going to be fine. Especially, I mean, if you're, I would assume you're using some sort of a wool or wool blend coating. Interface both of these pieces. So you're going to cut out two. One goes on the inside, one goes on the outside, and we're going to interface both. Now, for our back piece that looks like this. Oh, I need to bring my notch out to the edge. We are going to put in a little bit of interfacing. Now, bear with me a moment. So here at the hem, we're going to do our 3 inches because it's a 1.5 inch hem. So we want it to I think this is pretty straight across, but the minute I just draw straight across, it's not. Yeah, because it's lengthened and shortened at the bottom. Okay. All right. So I will trace off that little piece on the fold. You know, you got to remember that this is the fold for the hem. And then up here, I'm going to grab my side back. Which is somewhere. My side back piece, which also is going to get a hem. So I'm going to draw in its hem. And again, I just trace the pieces off, keeping in mind grain line and transferring any notches that you need to transfer. Okay, so the goal here is that basically I want my entire armhole to be covered in interfacing both on the body of the coat and on the, obviously, well, really just on the body of the coat. And then we'll also be interfacing, you know, our facings. So there is a lot of interfacing that goes on, especially like the back yoke, because the back yoke, one back yoke piece kind of acts as a back facing. And then obviously the front facings will be interfaced, but I am going to interface part of the front of the coat too. So what I'm going to do is, a general rule of thumb is to go down 2 inches from the side seam. And basically we are just doing this. And I have gone about 5/8 of an inch below our notch. So we'll pick it up here. So these will be obviously different. Actually going to make that a little shorter. We're going to come up. This is all very freehand. You want a curve just because it just doesn't create a harsh line. So there we go. Okay. So when those, we will pink both these sides, but those need to get interfacing pieces also cut out. So we'll be interfacing the top part of this and the top part of that, as well as the hems. So you'll need to go ahead and create interfacing pieces for that. Now, you want to do the same adjustment that you did on your center back piece. Do that same adjustment to your lining piece as well, because even though you have, there's extra ease in your back lining piece because we're going to be putting in a jump pleat here, a vertical jump pleat, a wearing ease pleat. But it needs to, you want to keep all of the ease that's been built into the pattern. So we're going to do the same adjustment over here on this side that we did to the back. So that's going to happen. You don't need any interfacing pieces drafted on the back lining piece, obviously. But I am going to do that. I'll do it off camera because it's the same thing as the back piece. And then, let's see, what else we got here? Lining. Okay, on our undersleeve, which we have not done anything with, let's look at our sleeve pattern, our upper sleeve pattern, just so that interfacing matches up. So on this one, on the longer side, I went down 3, and on the shorter side, I went down 2. Again, this is what the traced off pieces look like. They just kind of fit in right there, you know. Again, this is all very free-handed. So there's not really, I mean, you can't really mess it up. You just want your, especially your sleeves and your underarm seams, just to all be sorry, losing my train of thought here. You just want everything to kind of, to be nice and stabilized. And again, those curve lines just really help with things not showing through. And then I'm going to do 3 inches at the bottom, basically all hems, because both my shirt sleeve or my jacket sleeve, coat sleeve, everything is 1.5 inches. So we go up 3. Okay. So I'll be tracing off both of those. I mean, you could go a little deeper on this one. I just went down 3 and 2. I think that'll be fine though, but you could change that up a little bit. So that needs to have interfacing pieces traced off of it. Your collar piece, you cut one of these on the fold and just one of the interfacing on the fold, because this gets folded down on itself when all is said and done, so everything will be interfaced. So yeah, cut one of these on the fold and one of the interfacing on the fold. So we'll follow that per normal. And then I've not forgot about our Dior Dart. We're getting there. This is the side front piece. So we're going to, again, do our 3 inches here at the hem. This has some curve to it. And then also here at the underarm, I'm going to go down 2 inches. Now, this you want to be careful. You want the front to be above the bust. So our bust, you don't want any interfacing cutting across your boob. That is not good. So if we line up this here, obviously, hopefully you can see this fine. Dart aside, you can see the apex of where we're ending up here, which is right here. So we want everything, I mean, you could draw in your seam lines. I'm not going to go that far. But we want everything to be up and above that. Okay, so there, we're just roughly drew that in. We'll take this to there, and that will be our interfacing pieces there. Okay, so let's get, so that's the side front. So that's all the interfacing there. Let's see, we've got pattern piece 15 is just our buttonhole and button guide. I very rarely, well, we may use those. We will use those because we'll be doing about buttonholes. And then you can pick which pocket flap that you want to do, whichever one. If you want to do the, I'm going to do the shaped one for her, which is 18. Or you can do number 4. It's kind of up to you. Yeah, because this is the flap they used for coat A and B. This is the flap for coat C. We're just going to make a straight coat C for her. So you definitely will need interfacing. You'll cut 4 of these and do interfacing on 2. So follow the instructions on these. Cut 2 out of... Well, this says you're cutting 2 out of fabric, 2 out of interfacing because it gets folded on itself. This is 4 out of fabric, 2 out of interfacing, and that's what I'll do. I'll do the shaped one, but you can do either. And then obviously your pocket, we don't need any interfacing on that. It's just 2 out of fabric and 2 out of lining. All right. So now all we have left to deal with is our front piece, and we're going to remove that dart. We're just doing some simple dart. Hold on, I'm going to draw in my interfacing lines here. We're just doing some simple dart manipulation. Oh wait, no, I don't want to do that yet because that's going to change. Hold on, don't do that yet. Okay, so one of the reasons this Dior dart seems so pointy is that this is the apex right here. And look how close that dart is to the apex. It is pretty darn close. Like that is within an inch. I'm making the size 14. So that is within an inch, but I mean, that's the apex for all of them. Look how close that is to the 6, which is pretty close, even especially in a heavy fabric. So we are just going to manipulate the dart out of the side, and I'm actually going to manipulate it to the hem. Now that's going to cause the hem a little bit of flare, but I'm not upset about that because I think that's going to give, if you look at the line drawings on the pattern, it looks a little swishier than what the coat actually is in the front. So I think that I like that. I like that it's going to have a little bit more movement at the front of the coat. And it's going to create a little bit of a curved hem down here at the bottom, but I think that's going to be really beautiful. It doesn't change the seam line here on the side, so you don't need to alter any other piece. It is only this piece, which obviously will also affect, because you cut 4 of this and then 2 of interfacing, because we're going to do this piece out of interfacing here. This top part for the front. The other one will be the facing. So this front piece works as the front facing and the front of the coat. So what I'm going to do is, this is basically like what you would do for a full bust adjustment. I am going to, let's see, we're going to go, I'm taking, so my 14 point is here. I'm actually just going to take that to the center of this, which is the apex, and draw a line. And then I'm going to draw a line all the way down. And I want to make sure it is straight. So I'm following that grain line. Sorry, I know that I'm probably off frame, but I'm really just making the line all the way down to the bottom of the pattern here. Okay. And I will put paper underneath this, because we'll need it anyway. All the tracing paper. Oops, sorry. Okay, so now here I have my line drawn all the way up here to the apex, and then from the apex to, it doesn't matter, either of the dart legs of your dart. And this works, I mean, I'm using the AB cup front, because that's what my sister needed, but you can use, this works for obviously all of them. So I'm just cutting from the base of the pattern all the way up this line. So I'm not hinging at anything yet. All the way up, all the way up, all the way up, all the way up. And then stopping at that point. And then I'm gonna cut, sorry, it's hard to do around this tripod, from one dart leg also to that point. And then we are going to, sorry, my husband is talking on the phone upstairs very loudly. Now we're going to close that dart leg. Okay, so all I did, there was the dart, I've literally just closed that. Like so. And set my tape somewhere. Hey, welcome to the circus. Okay. Now look at this. This is so funny to me. So when you close what is seemingly a small dart, and it was a small dart, but look what that does. It creates such a bigger dart here at the bottom. So let me set this. Like, look how much fullness has just been added to the bottom of that coat. And I'm going to leave that because I like that. I think that that's going to give it a lot more swish and make it, because there's not a vent in this coat in the back. So I think that's just going to give it a little bit more walking ease, and I'm not mad about that at all. Now, if you wanted to, because I played around with, if you're taking out the dart, like it has to go somewhere. It could go up to the shoulder if you wanted, and then you've got just a bit bigger shoulder. Although that, I mean, if the shoulder fits you fine, which it does on her, that's causing an issue. Even though we've added to the shoulder at the back for her. I mean, you can manipulate a dart out anywhere. But it has to go into a seam line or to one of the exterior points of the pattern, which is just the geometry of it. So I'm just trying to think if you wanted to do something different. I also like, so my sister, were built similarly on the upper body. This gives her just a little bit more room in the waist as well, which I think is going to be helpful. She's just a little bit, I mean, she doesn't have a thick waist, but she's a little bit thicker in the waist. If you look at like proportionately, very similar to myself. We're built very similarly from the waist up. And I think that that's going to give her just a little bit more, if she's wearing like a sweater or something under this coat, it's just going to give her a little bit more room. So I think that that's going to work. But I'm trying to think if you don't want to add that. You know, one thing I thought that you could do is that you could just leave this dart here and then just ease it into the seam line, which might work. It may be a little more difficult for the larger cup sizes, but, you know, you could ease it over, you know, a little bit, you know, take your notches down and up a little bit and ease it over a larger space, and that could also definitely work. But yeah, for this coat, I think I'm just going to leave it as is. And I think that's going to be really, I think that's going to work. Especially because I'm just thinking about, yeah, I think that's going to work. So that's what I'm going to do. But yeah, you could definitely just try easing in that dart to get rid of it. Or you could sew the dart, obviously, I mean, if you wanted to. I'd had a lot of people say that they were having issues getting it looking nice, and I totally get that. Okay. So now I'm just going... You could have also taken the dart and closed it here and split this open, but I was noticing that was throwing off the front. You'd have to redraw, obviously, your center front line, and I was noticing that was throwing it off so much. I really didn't like that. So, yeah, you can play around with it, but yeah, the dart does have to go somewhere. And when you're doing a, I'd mentioned it's very similar to a, just a princess seam, doing an FBA and a princess seam. But that one you put a dart into the side piece that has the curve to it. This is the concave curve side, or the flatter side. So that made it a little different. And again, I'm not the be all end all when it comes to pattern alteration. So there could definitely be a way that I'm just not thinking of. But again, I think this is just going to add a lot more wearing ease and just a cuter, like, flared kick a little bit. Because again, if you look at the illustrations on the pattern, it looks like there's more movement in the jacket, especially that view C illustration, than there is. So I'm just going to do this. So now for truing the hem, you have to have a ruler. Here it is. I'm just basically going to connect the dots here, and then, you could take in more of a curve and make that a little bit more smooth if you wanted to. But now we're just going to go in and draw in our interfacing for our hem. I'm going to move my grain line down. Okay. So there we have it. So I'll be cutting out the interface here at the top, and then also interfacing for the bottom. And there you have it, guys. That is all the alterations for this pattern. So now I'm going to, off camera, trace out all of my interfacing pieces, and I'm going to cut out my coat and interface it. So when we come back next week, I will show you all the pieces that once they've been interfaced. Just take your time with all the pressing, and you'll see. I peek all with the pinking shears. I pink all of these edges that cut into the body of the fabric. So yeah, keep that in mind. Okay, guys, that is everything. I will, yeah, see you guys next week. Okay, bye.